Hello, I'm Steve Grizzetti, co-founder of MoviePix.com and author of the MoviePix.com Guide to Adobe Premiere Elements and Photoshop Elements together. And here we are in Adobe Photoshop Elements. A very basic tool in the program is colors, selecting and using colors and color swatches. I want to show you what foreground and background colors are in part 1 and how they're set. And then in part 2, we're going to take a look at some of the uses or most of the uses that are available for the foreground and the background color in the program. Now, the color swatches or the foreground and background color settings are found at the lower end here of the toolkit on the left side of the program. And you see it's by default a black swatch for the foreground color and a white for the background color. We can, of course, change those pretty easily simply by double-clicking on the swatch. So, for instance, set foreground color, I can double-click on that. And that opens up the color picker here for foreground. And I can use this slider here to set the hue or select sort of a range of color. And then selecting here in the picker itself, I can choose a color. And you notice that this color could also be set manually by selecting hue, saturation, and brightness, and RGB, red, green, and blue values. I'll show you what those mean in a second. Also down at the bottom, this is web color. It's a combination of letters and numbers. This is a way to specifically set the color. Now, why would you want to do it numerically when you can just do it intuitively? Well, I'll show you in just a second here. So click OK. You notice that once we've picked it, that becomes the foreground color. I can also manually find out specifically what color is being used in the picture by using the sampler. The sampler is this little eyedropper over here, also called the color picker tool. Click on that, and now when I hover over any pixel in the program, it's gaining information about that pixel. And in fact, if I click on it, look what it does. It changes the foreground color to whatever color it happens to be over. Now, a picture, of course, may look like just a blend of gradients of color, but of course, we know from Photoshop Elements, and we know it well, that we're actually looking at thousands, maybe millions of little squares called pixels that make up the photo. And this color picker is actually selecting one of those pixels to set the color for a foreground color. If we want to know more information about that pixel, we can go to the Window menu and we can select Info. And Info, look at this, as I hover over a pixel, will give me very specific information about the red, green, and blue values of that particular pixel. I can also set this, by the way, to hue, saturation, and brightness, or web color information, and it will give me specific information about that too. So if I want to set something so it's precisely the same color as this spot on the woman's cheek, the red value is 192, green is 128, blue is 100. Setting the background color is the same way. We just double click on that particular swatch and that opens up the color picker, and we can once again select a different color here for the background. What is the background color? The background color is what fills in the background layer when you remove something from it. So in other words, if I were to select the selection tool here, the marquee selection, and I select a part of the picture, when I press delete on my keyboard, it fills that area in with the background color. So the background color is going to be replacing what's removed from the picture on the background level. I'm going to Control Z or Command Z to get rid of that. And I'm going to, in fact, remove that completely. Notice the background color will also fill in if you use the eraser. When I remove part of the picture with the eraser, I'm going to use a bigger size here so you can get an example. There you go. When I remove part of the picture by erasing it, it is replaced by the background color, but that's only on the background layer. If you're working on an upper layer of the video, different things happen, and that's a whole different tutorial. But notice that the main purpose of the background color is to fill in when you remove something from the background layer. Let's remove that. There's also another way to set your foreground or background color. If you just go over to the Window menu, you can select Color Swatches, and Color Swatches opens up a number of swatch libraries here. And I can set the foreground color simply by selecting one of the swatches. And there are a number of libraries. The default library is just fine in most cases. There's also a Mac operating system color library and a Windows operating system color library that are not that different anymore. One time it was a huge difference, not so much anymore. There are web-safe colors back in the days when computers were a little more primitive. If you wanted to make sure your color displayed the same on every single computer in the world, you would stick to the web-safe color library. In most cases, the colors that you want to use, you can use from any one of the main libraries, the Mac, the Windows, or even just the default library. So that's another way to set your foreground and your background color. You can go back to the default setting of black foreground, white background simply by pressing D on your keyboard. Boom, there it goes. You could also have clicked on this little icon here, by the way. When you click on that, it goes back to the default settings of black and white. And you can switch them around by clicking on the double-headed arrow. Then, by the way, the foreground is also changed when you go to another tool and set the color there. So if I go to the shape tool, and when I select a color from its library, notice that whatever color I select is going to change the foreground color. Likewise, if I select text, I can change the foreground color by simply selecting a different color for the text. So it's constantly changing colors as you work. Now in part 2 of this tutorial, we're going to take a look at some of the basic uses for color. In other words, when does foreground come into play? When does background come into play? That's in part 2 of this tutorial here at moviepix.com. Stay with me. Hope you'll come back. I'm Steve Grizzetti. See you real soon. Thanks.